How young is too young to talk about the birds and the bees? One mum, Caroline Hemmingham, says she teaches her 2- and 3-year-old kids about sex, periods and where babies come from. She says they are some of the most natural things in the world, so why not talk about it? But is too young to have the talk? Isabel.
God, this gives me the creeps, this story. I mean, who are these people trying to talk to 2-year-olds about the birds and the bees? Look, 2-year-olds can't really string a sentence together, never mind understand these quite delicate concepts. And I really feel that we don't want to be starting this too early. And when I say not too early, I don't just mean not at 2, I don't mean at 4 or 6 either. You know, these things, hopefully they come up naturally at some point. They're certainly not going to come up naturally from a 2-year-old who's only really concerned about where their teddy is or what's next to eat. So I just find this whole thing really weird. I'm at the stage now, my children are just approaching puberty, my girls, and I've got to think about this stuff. And by coincidence, I had an email from the school today saying we're going to be teaching some of this stuff in our next RSE lesson, and we recommend you buy your kids a book about it to make it all a bit easier. And slightly cringingly, I've bought the book, and it's going to be strategically placed somewhere, and we'll see what happens. I'll have to report back to you.
As far as I'm concerned, you really must take your cue from your child.
100%.
You really must. So you don't take a 2-year-old, sit the 2-year-old down and start telling the 2-year-old about periods and sex. It's absolutely ridiculous.
They can't even talk.
No, and sometimes, of course, they give very confusing cues, because I remember one of my little girls saying, you know, where did I come from? And I thought, gosh, God, do we go into the whole sort of vaginal canal issue? Do we go through the whole kind of, like, you know, semen and seeds and planting?
What's wrong with my tummy?
I wasn't sure what to say. I was just about to go into some kind of deal. I wasn't sure. When she said, because somebody I know comes from Golders Green, I think she just meant which city or which town do I come from? I could have really ended up in real trouble with that one. So I think take your cue from the child, but be very careful that the cue you're reading is the right cue, but too much too early.
Too much too early, Nicola?
Look, my mum used to have a book called Questions Children Ask. Maybe it's a similar book to what you had. And it gave answers for children according to what age they were. And my mum would kind of nervously clutch this book and go, OK, well, turning on to the next page, we'll see what happens next. But she didn't necessarily speak to me about sex very young, but I still remember, like, sorry, this is a bit rude, but, like, bashing my Barbie and my brother's Action Man together in a kind of action and thinking, is that how babies are made? And my mum had no idea where it would come from. And she was very nervously going through this book going, what on earth do I say? But it does happen, doesn't it? Children talk about these things. There's always one kid in the class whose parent tells them more than you do. I think it's so important to start a kind of trusting relationship with your children so that they know they can come to you and you'll give them an honest answer, even if it's not an explicit answer.
But if you're age 2 or 3, you should not be getting spoken to about sex.
Correct.
I think it almost borders on child abuse.
Something's wrong with that, isn't it?
Now, to older kids now, and broadcaster Melanie Sykes says she's discussed porn with her son, who's now 20. This is what she said.
I remember having this conversation with my eldest. I just said to him, you know, if you are watching porn, just know that not all women look like that and not everybody wants to do those things.
Now, that is an awkward conversation, but is it one that has to be had? Isabel.
I totally ducked it. I mean, my son's nearly 15 now. It's way too late for that. You know, all the evidence is that they have been seeing this stuff, like it or not, since I think about 11. That's what the evidence says. My son would absolutely cut me off straight away if I went down that line. I think the schools do a fantastic job of teaching children a lot of the stuff we would want them to know about what's normal, what isn't, what's healthy, what's violent. And yeah, I'm not going there.
Oh, I think you've got to. I really do.
Really?
Yes, I do. I think lots of kids get shown porn by far older kids when they're much too young to understand what they're even looking at. So I think you do have to address it. And I think it's very, very important to explain exactly what Melanie said. You know, that's not what real sex is like. This is an industry. They are films. Lots of them are acting. The ones who aren't might be doing it for money. This isn't what women like. All the kind of, you know, violence and the yanking back of their head and the ghastly kind of... and also even the sort of climactic shots, which, I mean, like, those are most bizarrely athletic, odd, you know, money shots that, I mean, if anyone really incorporates those into their real sex life, I'd be absolutely flabbergasted and wonder why the hell they would. Maybe they watch so much porn they think that's the norm. It definitely isn't. I reckon you've absolutely got to talk about it to your children, just so they're not scared to talk to you about it if they've seen it.
I mean, that's reasonable.
And try and get it sort of
JJ, when is the age, JJ?
You don't, well, maybe age 15, 16, when it's legal to have sex, age 16.
Yep.
But you don't talk to your kids about Baywatch and say, this isn't how lifeguards really are. You don't go to watch Terminator and say, robots don't really do this.
Yeah, you probably should.
I don't think you should. Your kids should be smart enough to understand that.
Oh,
they grow up in
nonsense.
society.
How could they possibly?
Because they grow up. They're in school. They then go to
If they're 9 or something and they see...
My 9-year-old shouldn't be watching pornography. That wouldn't happen.
Shouldn't be, but what if your 9-year-old is, though? How do you know? You don't know what they show them at school or on the school coach or on the school trip. You've got no idea.
You don't have to go into detail, though, do you? I mean, I say to my girls, look, there's some really nasty stuff out there, and I don't want you just randomly Googling or playing on YouTube. You've got to be watching something specific, and I have to know what it is.
But also, you have to acknowledge that you may think it's really nasty. They might find it arousing. There's all of that. You don't want guilt and shame associated.
They're not going to find it arousing.
But at some point, they will. And they might be intrigued by it. They might be interested in it, stimulated by it.
Vanessa had spoken to every man I've ever dated to tell him that that's what you do not do.
It's very important to speak to people about it, children about it.